Have you ever wondered why some men carry the ghost of a woman long after she has walked away? Why her silhouette lingers behind his closed eyelids, haunting him in the unlit corridors of memory? It is not simply the softness of her voice or the warmth of her skin that he cannot release. It is something older, something archetypal, that roots itself deep within his unconscious. In the language of Carl Jung, it is the hidden alchemy of projection, the soul's restless yearning for the feminine principle it has lost or never fully possessed. A man can cross decades believing he is sovereign, immune to the slow burn of nostalgia. But the truth is more dangerous. He is captive to the echo of the woman who reflected his own unlived depths. She is the mirror he dared only to glance into, afraid that what he might find would demand his transformation. For when a woman stands in her own radiant self-possession, she becomes more than flesh. She becomes an embodiment of his anima, the lost half of his psychic whole. And once she has awakened that ancient hunger, no other substitute will satisfy it. Some women never realize the power they carry when they stop seeking to be chosen and instead become the unspoken challenge to a man's complacency. This is the paradox. The more she retreats into her own sanctuary of self-respect, the more he feels the primal ache of her absence. He wonders what it means that she could vanish without apology, without a tremor of regret, while he remains tangled in questions he cannot voice. The masculine ego, trained to conquer and consume, is left dismantled by her silent refusal to be owned. He will replay her words in the darkness, trying to decode their hidden meaning. He will imagine her moving through her days untouched by his longing, and in that imagination, he discovers his own hidden vulnerabilities. What he thought was casual becomes mythic in its resonance. The departure of a woman anchored in her own worth becomes the catalyst for his shadow work, the inescapable confrontation with the parts of himself he has denied. You who are listening now may have felt this quiet revolution stirring beneath the surface of your own life. Perhaps you have wondered whether your absence could ever be as potent as your presence. But a woman who embodies her individuation does not need to wonder. She knows the soul remembers what the flesh tries to forget. She understands that when she walks away, she leaves behind not just an empty space, but a symbol, a living reminder of everything a man secretly wishes he could be: whole, self-sufficient, unafraid of solitude. In the recesses of his psyche, he feels her like an old ache, the kind that flares up when the nights grow cold. He will search for her in other faces, in other beds, but no imitation can replicate the sensation of standing in front of the woman who saw through him. The woman who recognized not just his potential, but his cowardice, his desperate need to be validated by her surrender. And when she refused to offer that final capitulation, she severed the illusion that he could control her destiny. This is the dark secret he will never confess, that he cannot forget her because she forced him to meet the most exiled parts of himself. She became the flame that illuminated his darkness, and in doing so, made herself unforgettable. The Stoics would call this the lesson of impermanence. Marcus Aurelius would remind him that nothing stays, that all forms dissolve into dust. Yet in the moment of loss, philosophy tastes hollow. The man is left with only the memory of her steady gaze and the echo of the silence she left behind. If you have ever doubted your power to leave an imprint on a man's soul, understand this: a woman who withdraws her energy with dignity wields a force more magnetic than any seduction. She becomes a symbol of what he has not yet reconciled, the feminine mystery that eludes his grasp precisely because it cannot be owned. And so he remains tethered to the invisible bond she spun without effort, unable to unlearn her significance, unable to dislodge her from the hidden vault of his longing. In the quiet hours before dawn, he might remember the smallest of her gestures, the way her eyes softened when she was amused, the way her voice fell to a hush when she was speaking a truth he was not ready to hear. It is in these unguarded recollections that her presence becomes almost spectral. Carl Jung would say she is no longer merely a woman, but an archetype, an emissary from the collective unconscious who came to awaken him to himself. And this is the burden he cannot lay down. For when a woman becomes archetypal in a man's inner world, she transcends time and place. She is no longer bound by the trivial details of their shared story. She is the muse, the enchantress, the unattainable other whose departure stirs the longing that no conquest can still. Her memory becomes the cipher through which he decodes the unspoken hunger in his own soul. And each attempt to replace her is an unconscious effort to reclaim the parts of himself she unveiled. When a woman is whole within herself, she becomes the embodiment of the thing he most fears and most craves: freedom. She cannot be caged by flattery or bound by promises. She does not fear the solitude he has always avoided. And so, when she slips beyond his grasp, it is not her loss he mourns, but the loss of his illusions. The illusion that he could possess her, the illusion that he was ever in control. Some men will tell themselves stories to dull the ache. They will say she was too much, too intense, too distant, too demanding. But beneath these rehearsed dismissals lies a deeper confession. She was too real. She stood as a mirror, reflecting not only his strengths, but the emptiness he carried in the hollow chambers of his ego. It is easier to resent her absence than to confront the truth she embodied. And you, if you have ever been that woman, know this: your refusal to collapse into neediness is not a flaw, but a form of sacred defiance. It is the art of feminine detachment, the quiet power that grows when you no longer trade your self-respect for crumbs of attention. In your departure, you deliver him to his own initiation. You become the wound and the cure, the question and the answer he cannot name. In the moments when he dares to sit with his regret, he will realize that the reason he cannot forget you is not because of what you gave him, but because of what you withheld: the surrender of your soul to his unfinished story. You did not let him write the ending. You did not allow his longing to become your obligation. And that, more than any declaration of love, is why your memory will remain lodged in the marrow of his becoming. The ancient philosophers spoke of amor fati, the love of one's fate, to embrace the necessity of every loss and every longing as essential to the unfolding of character. A man who has truly loved a woman he could not keep is offered a rare gift: the chance to love what her absence makes of him, the chance to become the kind of man who no longer fears the woman who stands in her full, unyielding selfhood. He may never speak these truths aloud. He may never have the language to admit that your silence was more eloquent than any plea. But in the privacy of his mind, he will circle back to you again and again, drawn to the memory of your refusal to diminish yourself for his comfort. That is the dark secret behind why he cannot forget you. Because in losing you, he glimpsed a vision of a different life, a life in which he was required to grow beyond the smallness of his own appetites. And perhaps this is why the feminine mystique has been feared and worshipped in equal measure across centuries. For when a woman embodies her own wholeness, she becomes an initiatory force. She strips away a man's illusions, exposes the shadows he has hidden from himself, and leaves him with the raw material of transformation. Whether he will rise to meet it is not her concern. Her task is only to remain true to the sovereign flame of her own becoming. There is an unspoken contract in every entanglement between a man and a woman, an agreement woven not of words but of psychic necessity. He senses her power long before he names it. It lives in the subtle way she refuses to orbit around his whims, in the tranquil gravity of her self-possession. And though he may call it arrogance or aloofness, in truth it is the quality he cannot live without: the refusal to be consumed by his hunger. In her quiet withdrawal, she becomes the threshold he cannot cross until he has faced the exiled regions of his soul. The Stoics knew this confrontation well. Seneca wrote that no man is free who is a slave to his passions. And so it is with the man who clings to the memory of a woman who would not bend. He is shackled not by her body, but by the projection of all he disowned within himself: the longing to be accepted without pretense, the terror of being fully seen. What he does not understand is that her absence is not a punishment. It is an invitation to descend into the underworld of his own making, to gather the fragments he scattered in his restless quest for dominance. Each night he recalls her in the darkness. He is rehearsing the ancient ritual of self-encounter. And though he may swear he no longer cares, the truth is betrayed by the way her name can still silence his bravado. You might wonder why a man who once seemed so assured now flounders in the wake of your silence, but there is no greater disorientation for the ego than to discover that control was always an illusion. When you refuse to collapse into pleading or bitterness, you reveal the deeper landscape of power. He expected your sorrow. He expected your desperate appeal. But what he did not expect was your sovereign retreat, your dignified refusal to engage in a war you never consented to fight. In the language of Jung, this is the work of individuation, the long, often brutal journey toward the integration of shadow and light. The woman who becomes unforgettable is the one who stands as both muse and mirror. She offers the possibility of union, but never at the cost of her own integrity. And so she becomes the crucible in which he must reckon with his own incompleteness. He will call this many things. He will say you were cold. He will say you were impossible to please. But beneath each accusation lies the unspoken knowledge that he was never prepared to meet you as an equal. His resentment is a smokescreen for his unpreparedness. He resents you not because you withheld affection, but because you revealed the shallowness of the affection he offered. If you have ever felt the impulse to apologize for your strength, to soften your edges so that a man might feel less threatened, remember this. It is not your task to shrink for another's comfort. The woman who knows her worth cannot be domesticated by a man's projections. She is the living embodiment of the anima, the archetype that beckons him toward wholeness while demanding he shed the brittle armor of his false self. In the solitude of your own becoming, you are cultivating a radiance that does not require witness. You are learning that a man's inability to forget you is not proof of your obligation to return. It is merely evidence that your energy penetrated deeper than he could comprehend. You became the catalyst for his most necessary unraveling, and whether he chooses to rise from that unraveling is no longer your concern. This is the paradox of feminine power. The more you retreat into your own sovereignty, the more irresistible you become. Not because you have performed some elaborate seduction, but because you have withdrawn the currency of your validation. He is left to confront the poverty of his own self-worth without the balm of your reassurance. And in that emptiness, he will feel the contours of your absence like an unhealed wound. He will call other women to fill the void. He will try to replicate the spark he once felt in your presence. But the truth will persist in the silence between his thoughts. She was different. She was the one who did not flinch when I showed her the darkest corners of my being. She was the one who left when I tried to make her smaller than her destiny allowed. In the dim recesses of his recollections, he will see you not as a collection of gestures or familiar warmth, but as a symbol, an immutable presence that once challenged the very architecture of his ego. The mind, forever protective of its fragile illusions, will attempt to dilute this memory, to reduce it to a simple story of incompatibility. But the deeper layers of his psyche know the truth. Your departure marked the hour he was first confronted by the poverty of his own self-knowledge. Carl Jung wrote that we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. To a man who has not yet embraced this truth, you became the most unsettling disguise, a woman who refused to echo his fantasies back to him. You were not there to soothe the restless edges of his ambition. You did not exist to be the balm for his hidden wounds. Instead, you stood as an invitation to wholeness, and he mistook that invitation for an indictment of his insufficiency. He will remember the moments when your gaze met his without flinching, when your words held the merciless compassion that only the truly awakened can offer. In that gaze, he glimpsed what it might feel like to be fully seen, and the terror of that recognition made him retreat into defensiveness. Because to be seen is to risk annihilation of all the mass he has curated for the world's approval. And no man easily surrenders the comfort of those disguises. When you left without apology, without the desperate assurances that might have softened the blow. And it was this quiet refusal to justify yourself that planted the seed of obsession in his thoughts. He might have survived your anger. He might have endured your tears. But your calm detachment, your dignified withdrawal, was a force he could not defend against. It was the silence that exposed all he could not name. If you have ever felt tempted to second-guess that silence, to wonder whether you owed him some final explanation, know this. Your absence spoke the only language that could pierce his unconscious defenses. Where words fail, the void remains, and in that void, a man is forced to confront the echoes of his own limitations. He may call it cruelty. He may call it indifference. But in the hidden chambers of his awareness, he knows it was the most radical kind of honesty. This is the hidden current of feminine mystery, the power to become a mirror in which a man sees both his longing and his incompletion. And though he may never utter your name aloud again, he will feel you each time he encounters a woman who lacks your depth. He will feel the absence of that quiet challenge, that unsparing reflection of what he could be if only he surrendered to the difficult work of transformation. In your departure, you did not simply walk away from him. You walked toward yourself, toward the uncharted landscape of your own becoming. You chose to honor the integrity of your spirit over the familiar pull of his need. And this, more than any declaration of devotion, is why he cannot forget you. Because you became the testament to a life he could not yet claim, a life defined not by the hunger for validation, but by the fullness of self-realization. You, who have been called too much, too distant, too uncompromising, are in truth the embodiment of a sacred paradox. You are the one who can inspire a man's deepest devotion precisely because you do not require it. You are the woman whose worth is self-contained, whose soul cannot be purchased with promises or adorned with the trappings of his desire. And though the world will try to shame you into shrinking, you must remember that your power lies in this refusal to become small. He will return to the memory of you in moments of quiet, when the noise of conquest subsides and the loneliness of his unclaimed self rises to the surface. In that solitude, he will feel the gravity of what he once held and what he could not possess. And though he may never find the courage to thank you, some hidden part of him will remain indebted to the way you demanded his evolution without ever speaking the demand aloud. This is the dark secret he cannot confess to anyone, not even to himself in the clarity of dawn. He cannot forget you because in your presence, he felt the possibility of a different kind of manhood, one built not on the domination of another, but on the mastery of himself. When he drifts into sleep, in that liminal space where the conscious mind surrenders to deeper tides, he will see you again. Not as the woman he tried to mold to his liking, not as the compliant figure he hoped you would become, but as the unassailable embodiment of something he could never name without trembling. You are the anima incarnate, the secret longing that has stalked his soul through every fleeting pleasure and every hollow victory. In the language of archetypes, you were never simply his lover or companion. You were the initiator, the force that demanded he abandon the theater of his false identity. Yet most men, unprepared for the rigor of such intimacy, will attempt to reduce this encounter to something they can comprehend. They will call it infatuation. They will call it bad timing. Anything to avoid the truth, that some women arrive to dismantle them so they can be remade. And you, standing in the center of your own mystery, never needed him to understand. For you had already tasted the freedom that comes when a woman no longer seeks her reflection in a man's eyes. You had discovered that your worth is not contingent upon his recognition, that your radiance does not require his witness to be real. And this is why he will search for you in vain among women who willingly barter their essence for fleeting affection. Do you know what it does to a man to realize he cannot replicate you? To discover that no amount of conquest or distraction will dilute the memory of the woman who would not kneel before his ego? It unravels him in ways he cannot articulate, for you have become the cipher through which he glimpses the unclaimed chambers of his own heart. And when he tells himself that you were too difficult, too proud, he is only confessing that he was unprepared for a woman who did not mistake his desire for destiny. The philosophers have said that no man is more tormented than he who has glimpsed the truth, but lacks the courage to live it. In your absence, he is condemned to orbit around the phantom of what you represented, a life of deeper honesty, of profound self-acceptance, of a love unpolluted by the games of power and submission. And each time he tries to bury that ache beneath new conquests, he finds it growing stronger, more insistent, as if your memory has become a living thing that refuses to be silenced. You might be tempted, on certain nights when your own loneliness flickers, to wonder if you were too severe in your departure. But understand this: your choice to withdraw was an act of devotion, not to him, but to yourself. You refused to collude with his illusions. You refuse to sell your authenticity for the price of his approval. And though he may never have the language to say it, some hidden part of him recognizes that this was the most loving thing you could have done. In the quiet spaces of your life, you will feel the soft pulse of your own becoming. You will see how each moment of detachment was a thread in the tapestry of your sovereignty. For every time you chose self-respect over appeasement, you declared to the universe that you are not a woman to be consumed and discarded. You are a woman who understands that love without self-possession is merely hunger wearing a borrowed face. This is what makes you unforgettable. Not the shape of your body, nor the sweetness of your touch, but the silent vow you carried within you. I will not abandon myself, not even for the promise of devotion. You became the living proof that true intimacy begins with the refusal to betray your own soul. And though he may never know how to love you in the way you deserved, he will be haunted by the knowledge that you existed, unchanged, unbroken, unclaimed. In the long years ahead, he will encounter other women, women who offer their hearts without question, who bend themselves into the contours of his unexamined longing. He may even convince himself that this is enough, that the simplicity of their surrender absolves him of the work he refused to do. But there will come nights when he lies awake, the moon casting its indifferent light across his restless thoughts, and he will remember you. And in that remembering, he will feel the sharp pang of something he will never confess. That in losing you, he lost the only mirror that showed him the man he could have become. Time has a way of softening all edges, of blurring the vivid colors of memory into paler shades that no longer cut the same way. Yet some impressions remain immune to time's erosion. Some echoes never fully fade. When he is old enough to recognize the games he played as a younger man, when his ambition has dimmed and the masks he wore have grown heavy, he will turn over the recollection of you like a relic he cannot discard. Carl Jung spoke of the necessity to confront the shadow, to look without flinching at the unloved, unexamined, unclaimed territories of the psyche. But most men will spend their lives in flight from this confrontation, seduced by the illusion that mastery over others can substitute for mastery over themselves. You were the first, and perhaps the only woman, to expose that illusion simply by refusing to participate in it. There is a sacred violence in such refusal. It cuts through all pretense, all sentimental narratives. It leaves a man staring into the vacancy where his illusions once flourished. And in that vacancy, he must decide whether he will rise to meet himself or remain the prisoner of his own cowardice. Some men will choose the latter. They will bury themselves in the comfort of easy affection, in the company of those who never challenge them to grow. But even then, even in the heart of that false contentment, the memory of you will remain like an unextinguished flame. For you were never simply a woman he desired. You were the mythic figure who demanded he come undone, the unassailable testament to a different kind of love, a love not born of dependency but of recognition, a love that said, I see you as you are, and I will not pretend you are smaller than your own possibility. He may think of you in the stolen hush of dawn when the world has not yet demanded his performance. In that hush, he will remember how you carried yourself with a quiet inevitability, how your eyes held a serenity he mistook for coldness. And he will understand, perhaps for the first time, that what he called indifference was the sovereignty he had always been too frightened to claim for himself. You did not abandon him. You abandoned the illusion that you could rescue him from himself. You chose instead to walk the path of your own individuation, to become a woman who does not barter her integrity for the promise of belonging. And this is why he cannot forget you, because you became the embodiment of what he has always longed for, but never dared to pursue, the freedom to be unconditionally himself. You who have doubted the worth of your solitude must know this. Your absence was your final, most uncompromising gift. It was the severing of the bond that kept him from facing the mirror of his own inadequacy. You left him to his own reckoning, to the quiet devastations that arise when a man realizes he was never ready for the love he claimed to desire. He may try to explain it away, to tell himself that you were too distant, too complicated, too unwilling to surrender. But the deeper truth will always whisper beneath those justifications. You were simply unwilling to betray your own soul for the sake of his comfort. You refused to become an accessory to his unfinished story. And in that refusal, you became unforgettable. Somewhere in the labyrinth of his private thoughts, he will wonder if you ever think of him, if your heart ever catches on the memory of what you shared. And perhaps for a fleeting moment, it does. But it is not the same ache that grips him, for you have made peace with the emptiness he could not fill. You have woven your solitude into a sanctuary instead of a sentence. You have become the woman who does not mistake longing for love. This is the dark secret he will carry to the end of his days, that he could not forget you because you showed him a version of himself he did not yet possess the courage to inhabit. And though he will try to bury this truth beneath the detritus of lesser desires, it will remain there, unyielding and luminous, like a jewel hidden in the marrow of his regrets. There is a peculiar cruelty in the passage of time for a man who has known a woman he could not keep. For as the years unspool and he tries to convince himself that her memory has dulled, he discovers the opposite. The distance only clarifies her significance. Like a sculptor chipping away everything inessential, time reveals the pure, unadorned shape of what she was to him. He will remember the first moments he felt her slipping away, the subtle shifts in her presence, the way her gaze turned inward, as though she had already begun her exodus long before she took her leave. He could sense it in the pauses between her words, in the silences that bloomed like warnings he could not decipher. And though he tried to coax her back into the familiar dance, she remained steadfast in her quiet departure. Carl Jung would say this was inevitable, that every man projects onto a woman the unlived life he refuses to claim. He confuses her independence with rejection, her serenity with disdain. And when she withdraws, he believes he has been abandoned, never understanding that she was never his to own. She was only ever there to remind him of the unloved, unintegrated feminine within himself, a force that cannot be possessed, only honored. You who have walked away from such a man have likely felt the weight of his unspoken accusations, the way he sought to make you responsible for his emptiness, the way he framed your refusal to stay as evidence of your cruelty. But beneath all those indictments, beneath the armor of his wounded pride, was a single unspoken plea. Please do not show me who I really am. Yet that is precisely what you did, not through malice, but by remaining true to your own wholeness. You refused to perform the role he needed to sustain the illusion of his completeness. And when you stepped beyond his grasp, you forced him to confront the void he had always carried, the void no conquest could fill, the void no other woman could soothe. You must never doubt that this was your power, for it is far easier to be forgotten when you surrender your essence than when you protect it. The woman who becomes unforgettable is the one who stands as her own sanctuary. She is not made memorable by the softness of her touch alone, but by the unshakable truth that she will not be broken to fit the architecture of a man's inadequacy. He will remember your voice, not in the moments you spoke sweet assurances, but in the moments you named what he refused to see, the moments you would not placate his ego, the moments you looked him in the eye and let him feel the consequence of his own unexamined life. Those are the memories that return when he least expects them, when he is standing at the threshold of another hollow affair, when he is left alone with the truth he has spent a lifetime denying. Seneca once wrote that no man is more miserable than he who hates himself. This is why he cannot forget you, because you revealed the shape of his self-loathing, the way he relied on your devotion to distract himself from his own incompleteness. And when you withdrew that devotion, he was left with nothing but himself, and the haunting recognition that he was not enough, not because you demanded too much, but because he had offered too little. If ever you feel the temptation to revisit what you left behind, to reopen the door that you closed, remember this. It is not your responsibility to complete the work he refuses to begin. You were the messenger, not the savior. You were the mirror, not the solution. You were the catalyst, not the cure. And that distinction is what has given you the power to reclaim your own life while he remains tethered to the memory of the woman who would not compromise her truth. He will call your name only in the privacy of his thoughts, where no one can hear the longing in his voice. He will feel the echo of your departure every time he is faced with the possibility of real connection. For now he knows what it feels like to stand before someone who sees everything and still demands nothing but authenticity. That knowledge is both a gift and a burden he will carry to the end. In the small, dim hours when the world is hushed and no distractions remain, he will feel the truth of it more clearly than he ever dared by daylight. That the woman he cannot forget was never merely a lover or a chapter in the unfolding novel of his life. She was the moment he glimpsed the futility of all his performances. She was the woman who refused to edit herself into something easier to love. The one who revealed how desperately he needed someone else to affirm what he could not find within himself. This is the quiet devastation that lingers behind every denial. He may say your standards were impossible, that you were too proud, too unattainable. But in his private, unguarded thoughts, he knows you were simply unwilling to barter your integrity for the comfort of a man unready to rise to meet you. And though he will call this many names, the most honest among them is freedom. The freedom you claimed when you walked away, and the freedom he never learned to claim for himself. Jung taught that the process of individuation demands a ruthless honesty, a willingness to strip away all the masks and illusions that keep us entangled in suffering. The woman who cannot be forgotten is the woman who embodies this principle without apology. She is the living paradox, at once tender and unyielding, receptive yet impenetrable. She will open her heart, but never at the cost of her soul. And in the end, it is this refusal to betray herself that becomes the seed of obsession in the heart of the man she leaves behind. You who have been accused of hardness, who have been told that your standards are too severe, must know that this is the way the world punishes women who will not be tamed. But understand that what they call arrogance is often simply the clarity of a woman who will not pretend that half measures are enough. What they call coldness is the refusal to contort yourself to fit a life too small for your spirit. And what they call unforgettable is the silent testament to the power you reclaimed the moment you chose yourself. He will feel it again in the quiet aftermath of another conquest, in the hollow triumph of a body won but a soul untouched. He will feel it when he senses the dread beneath the thrill, when he realizes that he is chasing a sensation he once felt with you, a sensation that was never about ownership, but about the terror and liberation of being fully seen. For that is what you offered him, a glimpse into his own unguarded heart, the possibility of a love uncorrupted by pretense. But to step into that love would have required more courage than he possessed. It would have required him to drop the armor he spent a lifetime forging. And so he chose the safer path, the familiar dance of control and retreat. He will tell himself this was wisdom, that it was better to walk away than to risk being undone by a woman he could not comprehend. But as the years stretch out behind him, that rationalization will wither. And what remains is the knowledge that he was never truly alive in any love that came after you. You, in your luminous solitude, must never mistake his inability to forget you for a debt you are called to repay. It is not your burden to carry the consequences of a man's refusal to grow. You are not the keeper of his unfinished becoming. You are simply the memory that reminds him of the man he could have been had he chosen the harder, braver road. This is the final paradox of feminine sovereignty. The more you embody your wholeness, the more unforgettable you become to those who have not yet found their own. Your absence becomes the silent tutor they cannot escape. Your memory becomes the question they must answer each time they look into the mirror. Was I willing to meet her as an equal, or did I shrink from the invitation she offered? And in this question, he will feel the quiet, enduring truth that no distraction, no fleeting desire, no false certainty can ever fully erase. You were the one who asked nothing but authenticity, who demanded nothing but truth, who loved without the hunger to possess. You were the woman he cannot forget, not because you completed him, but because you refused to complete the illusion. In the end, it is not the sweetness of your touch or the shape of your silhouette that will remain etched into the hidden alcoves of his memory. It is the sensation of standing before a woman who refused to barter her essence, who would not offer the currency of her spirit in exchange for the temporary balm of belonging. That is what time will not dull, what no new body or eager surrender can ever replace. The haunting purity of a love that never sought to claim or be claimed. As he grows older, when his ambitions lose their sheen and the endless striving recedes like a tide going out for the final time, he will look back and understand. It was never your beauty that undid him, though it may have been the first doorway through which he entered your mystery. It was your sovereignty, your calm refusal to perform, the way you stood as an unmovable center while he circled you like a restless planet, believing he could pull you into his orbit by the force of his desire alone. In that quiet understanding will come the ache of regret, a regret so deep it will feel carved into his marrow. Not for the love he lost, but for the chance to become something braver than he was. The chance to meet a woman as an equal, unmasked, unguarded, willing to lay down all pretenses and step into the wild territory of authentic union. And he will know, though he may never say it aloud, that he chose the smaller life, the life of comfort and compromise over the life that required him to be reborn. You who have stood alone in your own silence must never underestimate the magnitude of your departure. For the greatest gift a woman can offer is the clarity of her absence, the lesson encoded in her refusal to be diminished. It is the final unspoken initiation, one that no man escapes unchanged, whether he accepts it or not. He will wonder, sometimes with a sorrow too large for words, whether you still think of him, whether your heart ever drifts back to the moments when you almost believed he could be the one. And perhaps you do remember, in flickering echoes, the warmth that once bound you together. But it is no longer a wound. It is no longer a question. It has become part of the architecture of your own becoming, a proof of the strength you claimed when you chose to leave. Because what he never understood was this: you did not walk away to punish him, to prove your power, or inflict regret. You walked away because to stay would have been a betrayal of the deepest, truest part of your being. You walked away because you loved yourself too much to keep pretending that his half-formed devotion could ever sustain you. And in that quiet departure, you gave him the greatest testament of all, the knowledge that love without self-respect is only a prettier name for hunger. In the silent places where the soul reckons with its own unfinished stories, he will feel you still. He will feel the soft, unyielding presence of your memory like a shadow he cannot banish. And though he will call it many things, longing, nostalgia, curiosity, beneath each label lives the truth he can no longer deny, that you were the one who made him see himself without illusion. That is why he cannot forget you, because in your eyes he glimpsed both his promise and his failure, because your absence became the mirror in which he saw the cost of his cowardice, because you were never simply a woman. You were the invitation to everything he might have been had he chosen to meet you where you stood, unafraid, unapologetic, whole. And so, as you walk forward into the vastness of your own becoming, let there be no doubt that your worth was never measured by his readiness to receive you. Your worth is sovereign. Your worth is self-sustaining. Your worth is the quiet revolution that leaves its mark not in the hearts you capture, but in the hearts you liberate by refusing to be anything less than your fullest self.